What's going on, everyone? Coming at you with a special One Piece video today. My first ever deck profile for Blue Purple Crocodile, the deck that I think I have the most fun piloting. This deck I think is a very strong deck in the current meta because of a lot of support that both blue and purple got in this format. I think there's a lot of strong cards that are available to Blue Purple Crocodile that really further what it wants to do. A lot of these cards are not only event cards, but additional characters that are going to be very impactful and continue to let you generate advantage without much committal. So without further ado, let's hop into the deck profile. So starting off with our 1 costs, I am running 3 Mr. 1, and Mr. 1 is on play is add one blue event card with a cost of 1 from your trash to your hand. This card's fantastic because not only is it a body on board that you can use to kill searchers like Momo, like Bonnie, it's also going to return your Desert Spadas back to your hand. So if you want to think about this logistically, you're probably playing like 7 Desert Spadas in your deck, which means that not only is he a 1k counter, a body that you can play on board, but he's basically saying that you have 7 Desert Spadas in your deck, which means that that's 7 2k counters. That's going to be 7 draws from your leader effect. That's going to be 7 different attacks that you're likely going to be able to counter out of. So it's an extremely strong card, I think, and he is a target for Ivankov in the late game as he is an impel down card, and he just synergizes really well with the deck. We're playing 4 Trafalgar Law. I think that 1 cost blockers aren't as good as they were before, but this deck is playing so many different blockers that there is merit to playing this. There are times when, you know, if your opponent's forced to deal with this blocker, that means less Dawn available that they have to swing at you, and the less Dawn they have, the more likely you're going to be able to counter out of those attacks. We're playing 4 Missile Sunday. This card's pretty self-explanatory. It's a blocker with a 1k counter that's going to let you recycle your Love Beams and your Desert Spadas. This card essentially becomes either a 4k counter or a 2k counter, depending on what you use to grab back with it. You don't really care if it dies, even if it's not on block, because as long as you have an event card in the trash, it's going to get its effect off. I think this card's pretty mandatory because, again, that's 4 more draws you're going to get off your leader effect. And if it's Love Beam, it could be, 8 more draws from it. So it's a really, really good card. I'm playing 4 Sasaki. This card is good because it's a 2k counter, it's purple, and it has a good stat line of 3 cost 4k, but it's also a ramp card if you really need to ramp. There's not really a ton of situations where you really need to ramp with this deck. However, it's actually pretty good in certain matchups if you need to deal with their board. I actually had a game recently where I played a Sasaki early, and I was thinking that this is something I wouldn't generally do, but it let me control the board a bit more, swinging over some lower cost bodies, and it ended up being very helpful in the matchup. So playing 4 of him is a pretty useful card. For our 4 costs, we're actually only playing 4 4-cost cards. We're playing 2 Inazuma and 2 Mr. 3. Inazuma is a card that's a target for Ivankov. It's also a card that it becomes 7k if you have 1 card or less in your hand. Now that can be pretty useful in the late game because there will be scenarios when you do run out of cards. Thankfully, we have a lot of cards that refill our hand, but getting him to 7k could be the difference between, clearing an opponent's character or not. 2 Mr. 3, because this is a card that is also offensive and defensive. It's a blocker that can also swing and restand. I think cards that can restand are extremely underrated. It's kind of like a mini 7-cost kid. Obviously, the stat line's not nearly as good, and it's not as much commitment. It's more commitment than the kid. However, think of it as like a worse version, and I think kid is extremely strong. So being able to get this card out for 4 cost or sometimes even free and have him be a body that's live to block and attack can be pretty impactful. I'm playing 4 X-Drake. X-Drake I think is pretty self-explanatory. It's a 2k counter, and its on-play effect is pretty strong. Being able to make your opponent trash a card from their hand could be the difference between you killing your opponent, you destroying one of your opponent's characters, or you surviving a turn. So I've used him as a counter, I've used his on-play effect. It just really depends on the scenario and where you're at in the game, but X-Drake is phenomenal. I'm playing for Mr. Bonclay. Mr. Bonclay, I don't think I'd ever use his on-attacking effect unless I was seriously in doubt of decking out for some reason. But he is a 2k counter, he is a 5k body, and he's something that you can play off of Ivankov. So again, having as many 2k counters in the deck as possible is awesome. We have a total of 12 2k counters from our characters, as well as an additional, you know, let's say 7 2k counters from Desert Spada. So it's a really, really strong card in the sense that it's a 2k counter, but you can also play it off of Ivankov's effect, and it is Impel Down. I'm playing for Queen. Queen's pretty self-explanatory. It's a good stat line for a blocker. You can use it aggressively, and being able to draw 2 cards and trash 1, make sure you get some duds out of your hand. There may be games where you don't need certain cards in your hand, so you want to make sure that you get them out of your hand, and this card allows you to do that. So that's why I'm playing for Queen. Also, again, 5 cost 6k is a very good stat line that's also a blocker. And, you know, if you turn this card sideways to clear your opponent's board, it's a lot easier to protect because, again, that additional 1000 power makes it that much stronger. I'm playing 2 of the 5 cost 7k vanilla crocodiles. This card is mostly a target for Ivankov, but it's also a 1k counter, and there are games where you might need to have this body out there. He's a bit hard to deal with. I think the 7k vanillas are you know, they're cards that your opponent kind of has to deal with. If they don't, then, you know, they're going to lose out, and they also require a lot of commitment. You know, decks like green can't just tap him down unless they're using a Yamato, and they still have to swing over top of him. Decks like red have to use Otama and Jet Pistol to clear him. So if you can buy a turn with this deck where you're forcing them to use 2 resources to get rid of 1, then that's a huge win for you, because eventually you'll end up outpacing them. I'm playing 2 of the 7 cost King. I think in this format, 7 cost King is really strong because he gets rid of a lot of threats. He gets rid of threats like Zoro, he gets rid of threats like Okiku, and being able to clear 2 bodies sometimes late in the game is super impactful, and being 7 Dawn means that you'll still have like 3 Dawn up for like a Desert Spada and a Love Beam, or a Blast Breath and a Love Beam, or whatever your combination is. So being able to play him for 7, and then if you're at 10 Dawn, that -2 Dawn isn't really a huge deal. Earlier in the game, if you're clearing 2 impactful cards off the field, if you're buying yourself a full turn, and then you also get to have a 7k beater on board, it's just phenomenal card in this format. I'm playing 2 Emporio Ivankov. I think Ivankov's a pretty strong card. I think that his effect to play another card is absolutely crazy, especially in this deck that's running so many different targets for him. He's also going to refill your hand when it gets pretty low. There's been situations where, you know, I've countered my entire hand away, but my last card that I used to counter was a Desert Spada. I see, wow, there's an Ivankov on top of my deck. I'm going to put that there. I'll draw that Ivankov from the start of my turn. I'll play him, and then I'll have 3 cards back in my hand. You don't always have to play something off the effect even if you draw it, so just refilling your hand is super nice sometimes. And if you can consistently refill your hand while starving your opponent, there's no way they're going to win this matchup. This deck really thrives in battles of attrition, and so if you can continue to win those battles, then you're gonna win the game with this deck. Also, being a 7k stat line is really, really good. The only things that this deck really struggles against are things like Kuzan, the 10-drop. I think it also probably struggles against Odin and Whitebeard because of their stat line. 9k, just a hard body for this deck to get over top of. So these guys are, you know, these 7k monsters are there just to kind of help you get to those, you know, 9, 10k marks, so that you can late game, if you have to, commit 5 Dawn to one of them to swing over top of a guy, and then have 5 Dawn active for counters. As long as you're guaranteeing yourself that you're going to survive a turn, you don't really care about swinging a life until it's absolutely safe with this deck. Moving on to our event cards, I'm actually not playing any offensive event cards in this deck. I think that they're kind of overrated. I think this deck, again, it just wants to stall it out and eventually win. I think that there are cards like Airbeck Brickfist that are good, cards like Hydra that are good, but I think they slow you down just a bit too much, and I think this deck wants to establish a wide board, protect that board while killing your opponent's board. So I'm playing 4 Desert Spada. This card, again, it's a 2k counter for 1 cost, and you can look at the top 3 cards of your deck, rearrange them, and then you're going to draw one of those cards you put at the top of your deck. So that's one of the sweet benefits of this card is, you know, let's say you have 3 Dawn active, you play a Desert Spada, you rearrange top of your deck, you only have 4 cards in hand, you draw off leader effect, and then boom, you have a Love Beam, and then you can counter out another attack and then draw off the Love Beam, so you can continuously refill your hand. Super phenomenal card. And then the trigger effect is actually pretty good as well, drawing 2, trashing 1. I mean, it's a mini queen, so we love that as well. I'm playing 3 Blast Breath because late game this card is absolutely bonkers. A 1-cost 4k counter for only Dawn -1 is really good, and you're going to be able to use that to protect a lot. I actually had a game not too long ago where I protected 2 15k swings from leader back to back, and I mean, if you're able to do that consistently, it's really hard for your opponent to even think about playing the game. So one thing to be mindful of against red is if you're taking lots of life swings early, you're going to have to store these counter cards in hand to protect. So we love that we're able to do that. I'm playing 2 Hell's Judgment. I think this card you could play at 3 if you want to play 2 Blast Breath. Hell's Judgment's really good because it's a 2-cost -3k power on 2 of your opponent's characters or leader, which means that you're essentially going to counter 2 attacks with this, which is really strong. If you can counter out 2 attacks in the early game, or even in the late game when they're swinging at 5k at you, that's just super duper important. But there'll be turns where your opponent will think they'll have lethal, and then you play this card and their entire game plan's messed up because now they have to reallocate Dawn, and if they've already committed that Dawn to certain characters, then it really can mess up their turn. So we love this card in the deck. Its trigger is not super great, but there is merit, I think, for this card. If they have 6 or more Dawns, so let's say you're playing a deck that really wants to get to like that 9 or that 7, for example. So let's say they're at their 7 Dawn turn and they swing with their leader first, and then you can send one back and they don't get to play their Ivankov, or they can't Kinemon play their Kazuki Odin. So there are merits to letting the trigger effect go through, but oftentimes you just want to take it to your hand. There's no reason to really ever let it trigger. And then we're playing probably the best card in the deck, one of the best blue cards I think that's been printed so far, and that's Love Beam. Love Beam is incredibly strong. It lets your hand continue to get refilled, and again, 4k counters are just awesome. There is merit to playing things like Deathwing if you think that you are always going to be low on cards, but I think 3 cost to leave up consistently is pretty hard. So I think Love Beam's the much better choice. And if you sequence your hand right, you're basically always going to be drawing off the Love Beam effect. So that is my blue-purple Crocodile deck. It's like an Animal Kingdom Baroque Works Impel Down deck, but it's pretty strong. I like it. I think it has some tough matchups against Smoker and against Whitebeard and potentially against Kazuki Odin, but I think it's still playable. I don't think the matchups are so overwhelmingly bad that it's unplayable. I think that it's strong. I mean, Smoker can remove your blockers, but they have to commit a lot to remove your blockers, I think, most times. They're committing a Sakazuki, or they're committing something like a Kuzan to get rid of these blockers, and if they're doing that to get rid of one of them, and then they're not turning them sideways, or if they are turning them sideways, eventually you'll be able to swing over one of them because you've just outpaced your opponent in hand size. So I think there's lots of merits to playing this deck. Once you get really good at it, you know exactly what to counter, what not to counter, what to protect, what not to protect, and what to block and what not to block. I want to, in the future, go over another potential deck list for Blue-Purple Crocodile. It's a more aggressive variant. I personally don't play it, but I do see the merit to playing it. So if you guys are interested in that, let me know. But until next time, Monty out.